August 2025, militants launched a targeted assault on a Gilgit-Baltistan scouts checkpost in the Durrell Valley of Daimer. The engagement left 2 soldiers dead. The topography of Daimer is defined by isolated, high-altitude ridges and narrow corridors, making the region exceptionally difficult to patrol from a centralized position. Initial reports often attempt to characterize such violence as a local liberation movement or a fight for regional rights. In this case, the evidence suggests a different origin. The Durrell attack is better understood as a symptom of a structural crisis, one rooted in long-standing security policies that have integrated militant groups into a broader strategic framework. Security studies scholars describe this outcome as blowback. It is the specific process where a state is gradually destabilized by the same violent actors it once tolerated or supported as tools of regional influence. For decades, official policy relied on an artificial categorization of militants. Groups were labeled as good terrorists if they served state interests abroad, and bad terrorists if they targeted the state directly. This division was a strategic illusion, a temporary administrative tool, used to manage regional ambitions while attempting to insulate the domestic front. The state viewed these proxies as controlled instruments. However, militant networks operate more like biological ecosystems. They are living, autonomous, and capable of adapting to their environment. This diagram illustrates the state's original logic: clean lines of control, where central authority activates isolated proxy groups at will. But when provided with ideological fuel, consistent funding, and safe harbor, their internal characteristics change, gaining capacity to set their own objectives. Network theory suggests that a proxy ecosystem eventually evolves beyond the control of its sponsor. Once a group achieves a certain level of resource independence, it naturally pursues its own survival over the interests of the state. Complex systems science identifies this as the uncontrolled evolution of non-state actors. It describes the point at which an armed group's development can no longer be predicted or managed by its host. This evolution reaches a threshold when a group secures enough financial and ideological autonomy to deviate from its original mandate. Observe the shift in topology. Proxy groups stop relying on the central state node, instead forming horizontal connections. As these links multiply, they merge into a dense, self-organizing cluster that operates entirely independently of the state's intelligence apparatus. As the density of these intergroup connections increases, the state loses the leverage required to influence the network from the center. Influencing a single node no longer dictates the behavior of the entire system. In this system, providing resources to a proxy is essentially a guarantee that those same assets will eventually be turned against the host state. We are seeing this network theory play out in the 2025 emergence of the Ittihad-ul-Mujahideen Pakistan, or the IMP. The IMP is the physical manifestation of these abstract network links. It is a unified front of well-equipped militant factions, pooling tactical and human resources. The merger includes several previously distinct groups: the Hafiz-ul-Bahadar Group, Lashkar-e-Islam, and Harkat-Inqilab-e-Islami. This consolidation indicates that the insurgency has moved past the stage of scattered frontier skirmishes. It has transitioned into a mature, multi-layered organization with regional reach. The IMP represents the moment where the infrastructure of proxy warfare begins to actively erode the very state that authorized its creation. The Global Terrorism Index, or GTI, provides a quantitative measure of this instability. The GTI is an annual report that tracks the impact of terrorism based on fatalities, incidents, and property damage. The 2025 report ranks Pakistan as the world's second most terrorism-affected nation. This chart shows the acceleration of the crisis. In 2024, fatalities from terrorist incidents rose by 45%. A breakdown identifies the primary driver. The TTP was responsible for 52% of all terrorism-related deaths. These figures suggest that the primary security threat is now internal. The majority of casualties are resulting from domestic groups rather than external proxy engagements. The concentration of fatalities within this single network indicates that the systemic imbalance the state helped create has become a self-sustaining internal contagion. Claiming responsibility for the August 2025 attack in Daimer signaled a major shift in the TTT strategy. The Militant network is moving away from the peripheral border regions and targeting areas that are vital to the country's economic and geographic integrity. This region is central to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, a massive network of infrastructure linking China's Xinjiang province to the Arabian Sea. Gilgit-Baltistan is the geographic gateway for this corridor. If this region becomes unstable, the entire economic initiative is put at risk. Insecurity in this corridor leads to a chilling effect on international investment and puts a strain on the strategic partnerships that underwrite the country's development. The blowback of proxy warfare eventually targets the state's economic lifelines. What began as a security tactic has become a direct threat to the nation's financial future. To understand why this outcome was predictable, we look to blowback theory. Blowback occurs when a state's covert or indirect support for violent actors results in unintended negative consequences that eventually strike back at the state itself. There is a clear historical precedent for this. During the 1980s, the U.S. provided massive support to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to counter Soviet influence. That support facilitated the rise of al-Qaeda, which later turned its resources against the U.S. Pakistan is now experiencing a similar cycle with the TTP and the IMP. History shows that proxy networks follow a consistent pattern. They eventually turn their weapons and training back toward the very creators who initially empowered them. While geopolitical theories play out, the immediate impact is felt by the people of Gilgit-Baltistan. This region faces deep-seated challenges, including constitutional ambiguity, a lack of local political representation, and significant economic underdevelopment. Residents require investment in schools, hospitals, and civil infrastructure. Instead, they witness a steady increase in militarization as the state reacts to rising violence. This leaves the civilian population caught in a vice between the restrictive security measures of the state and the unpredictable violence of insurgent groups. Addressing this crisis requires moving beyond the distinction of good and bad militants. Against a mature, integrated network, a strategy based purely on military force is unlikely to produce lasting stability. Dismantling this ecosystem requires broad reforms across education, economic policy, and political inclusion. The situation in Gilgit-Baltistan shows how difficult that path has become. Ultimately, a state forced to fight the very networks it helped build is effectively exposing a self-inflicted weakness. The instability in Gilgit-Baltistan is the visible proof of that strategic failure.